man, that was so far apart. I would have thought that it was Democrats and Republicans clapping.
Heyo.
All right, beep 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 beep. Good morning, Rogan Nam.
I
It was
wonder
a shout out.
how long ago you prepared that one, or if it just happens.
It was a shout out to my wife who told me to yell "Good morning, Vietnam,"
Aha.
and I modified
You
it.
put a spin on it.
Little spin.
Like
Little
you're a
spin.
Democrat or a Republican.
Yeah. What I will tell you I am is Ryan.
Interesting. I'm Harland.
We're Dawdlers.
And we're here on the Dawdlers Philosophy Podcast.
Music. Anyway, so yeah, oh yeah, we return to you 2.1 listeners, and we're here to talk and argue about stuff tonight, and that in particular. I don't even know what to call this in particular, but I guess the overarching umbrella term, you correct me, Harlan, but we're talking tonight about argumentation theory.
Did you know that was a thing?
No.
Because that's actually a field of study. And a disappointingly few of my community members seem to know about it. But yeah, it's not quite logic. It's not even informal logic or rhetoric. But there's just literally a discipline called argumentation theory. And I'm interested in it. Because,
I'm interested in it.
Yeah.
Wait, because
I'm glad you asked. No. Because, as we've talked about on previous episodes, there are epistemic concepts that most of my conspecifics appear to rely on that I don't have access to as a responsible skeptic. And as we've talked about on, episode 4, I don't think we ought to care about or pursue the truth so much. I guess that was in the 3 a little bit too, with the Trimond, right? But if we don't have truth, and we try to be normative meta-epistemological skeptics and not make any strong assertions or claims to knowledge, but also don't want to be a crystal necklace wearing, Portland, Oregon living, well, this is just my truth and you have your truth and everyone's entitled to their own opinion. If we want to avoid that, but also avoid, I know what's true and fuck you if you disagree with me, here's my nuclear button. What is in between? And for me, it is what fits that bill is argument.
Sweet diggity. Now, why does argument fit that bill? And why is it that crystals don't appeal to you?
Because I value agreement. And then, why do that? It seems to me that collaboration on large scale, even historical scale projects to bring our environment more in line with our preferences seems better, seems preferable to me to war and strife and stress and violence, all the things that can typically follow from disagreement. And both of the extremes of the spectrum, dogmatism and epistemic egalitarianism, are enshrinements of disagreement. If you have a doctrine that you accept and require everyone else who's relevant to you to accept also, then there's not much those two, when they come into conflict, can do about that, other than resort to non-semantic options like nose punching or bomb dropping. And if you go the other way, such that everyone gets to say whatever they want, then again, you're still going to rest in states of disagreement. It's just that for some reason, these people, perhaps out of a desire for comfort or some sort of social norm of politeness or some sort of perhaps fear at defending their own beliefs, are willing to just countenance a radical egalitarianism of everyone is entitled to whatever they want. If so, it's highly likely that everyone will disagree about almost everything. The entire rest of the spectrum from 1 to 99, I think, if we're going to avoid these extremes, is going to be seeking a dispute resolution mechanism. And it seems to me that we might as well take advantage of this wonderful gift that we've got of language, sufficiently enhanced by the study of general semantics, among other things. And let's use that to resolve our disputes and mediate our collaboration around achieving our projects.
Period.
So, and then argument would be somewhat defined as the study and development of procedures to utilize language to resolve disputes, to minimize disagreements, maximize agreements. As the sort of really broad sense. And that's the version that I would be defending or in favor of when I would say something like, I really care about and like and value argument and think that that's what we ought to emphasize. Yeah. That make any sense? Got any thoughts?
I have thoughts. The first one is that this sounds like some type of skill you have to learn and acquire. It doesn't sound like something you can just hear once and then execute. And I can see like a lot of these things that we've talked about, talking about truth, talking about enemy skepticism, talking about general semantics, all of these things to a degree require work. So how would you make a numbnuts like me, feel better about what I'm going to have to do to resolve disputes with other chimps?
I think that everybody argues, right? Was that a children's book you had in your nightstand? Everybody does
Yeah.
these things,
Yeah.
before or after pooping, whatever. Everybody argues. But
Yeah.
there can be different degrees of sophistication and intentional behavior and rule governed behavior within it, or it can just be whatever you've contingently received from your environment and in your chimpish manner extolled henceforth. And that's one of the major differences in the study of argumentation theory. Many people come at it from a more descriptive or a more normative orientation. Some people,
Mm-hmm.
they're more kind of empirical social scientists that are walking around and looking at actual human arguments. For some reason or other, you read a lot of articles and books of people taping in airports and then in detail, in excruciating detail, reconstructing and analyzing these really, what the normative people would say, bad arguments, where there's immense landscapes of missing premises and appeals to authority, and it's most natural in the wild argumentation that happens in America 2018 or America late 20th, early 21st century. Argumentation theory, it looks to me, basically separated itself from philosophy and the rest of science to become its own thing and have its own name and its own literature around the 40s and 50s, really taking off to the extent it took off at all, 60s and 70s, and up through today. For some reason or other, perhaps an indication of the high trait civility in this culture compared to maybe America. The hub for this appears to be Amsterdam. Wonder if there's a correlation there. But so, yeah, everybody argues. However, there can be argument itself. There can be a debate about how much we should attempt to institutionalize argument or debate and make it a stringent discourse norm following attempt at maximizing something or other. And one of the ways to do that, maybe the simplest way, is to just attempt it a lot and repeatedly and with the same people, which I think you and I have experienced over the years in our various get-togethers with interested members of the public or some of our select esoteric groups, that we just kind of can figure out over time, well, what has worked, what hasn't worked, what has been repeatedly frustrating, what appears to be more fruitful. Can we extract out from our own experience as a group some things that seem to work well? And if so, can we codify them, stress them, and attempt to abide by them in the future and just kind of have a continuously developing core of norms to use? And that has worked well to my perception.
Yeah, I mean, I hope that we've all kind of, in our experiences, kind of the repeated ones, I hope that that's worked out and that we've made improvements. I worry sometimes that, I still myself am kind of, you know, focused on a rhetoric, and I don't know how much a rhetoric, you know, has a place in argumentation outside of, it being sometimes the only thing one is using to get a point across, or even also to, persuade another to, um, to appreciate the point and to, maybe if not adopt it, at least respect it in a particular way. And sometimes I worry that that's kind of what I do quite a bit is, you know, rhetoric. We can get into the details of argumentation theory, so I won't jump the gun too early right now. But there seem to be, I mean, you did mention premises a little bit ago in the, the criticism of those who practice argumentation theory or do the research, in talking about how, there's a lot of crappy premises or very few or whatever. And, sometimes it's, I'm not providing personally, I'm just talking for myself, but I often feel like I'm not providing a lot of interlocked premises, and there probably often is quite a bit of an appeal to authority, you know, um, but it's only because it's like, well, it's like, well, I'm the only one in the room who can juggle, so everyone just has to say, well, okay, he can juggle those balls and I can't. But if I could really, we could get into it a little more. There's, I feel like, I mean, and that hopefully is the place where we grow, but I hope that I am growing, anyway, that's what I'll say.
Yeah, you're growing, older if nothing else.
Sorry,
Uh,
I don't know where that came from. That was like insecurity. Anyway.
Before we go any further into the night, people will be disappointed if I don't, throw out my prepared quote here.
I know, Jesus Christ, we're going on like almost 20 minutes now. Fuck.
I wanted to share a passage from one of the... he's a big name within argumentation theory, but hasn't, to my knowledge, made it out of there. But this person's name is Charles Wilard, and he wrote a really impressive, to me, work called A Theory of Argumentation. But this is one kind of literary passage where I think he pretty much addresses what you were maybe kind of saying. We'll see. Anyway, and to me, in this, this is being recorded and will be released onto the internet and be out there for who knows how long, so there won't be an orienting moment. But this podcast is being recorded in the midst of the Brett Kavanaugh Supreme Court debacle. And so all of that, to the extent that politicians attempt to emulate argument and have their version of debate and rhetoric happen, this passage to me also has some resonance with what's happening in the current news cycle. Anyway, you ready? Quote!
As we look at the world we really live in, it is sometimes hard to believe that decision-making and rational deliberation are anything more than the dated argot of a credulous age like heraldry and chivalry. The language of argument seems anachronistic, not merely passé like snuff boxes and powdered wigs, but unfit and incompetent. Argumentation books seem to belong on the fantasy or gothic romance shelves. If decision-making is little but post-facto rationalization, rationality a whore's rouge for touching up institutional excrement, and debate a legitimizing morality play for cloaking greed, corruption, and inertia in a mantle of respectability, in sum, a cynical, empty, false consciousness, made all the worse because we sustain it to fool ourselves, then things are beyond control. Alienation is the stance of prudence. When public rationales differ substantially and substantively from the pragmatic genesis of decisions, the public forum becomes an empty shell, a theatrical stage or a stylized ritual, prized for its entertainment value, but empty and valueless except as fuel for cynics. A wish and a pinch of pixie dust won't make debate and critical thinking real possibilities in our world.
End quote.
Wow. That was a great quote.
Yeah, I kind of liked it. And, thinking of characters like Lindsey Graham and Chuck Grassley and hearing that.
Right.
Yeah.
For sure. I feel like that we are also, to a degree, the cynics.
Confirmed.
Yeah. So, yeah. That guy knows how to write.
Yeah, I thought he's pretty good.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so we've got that cynicism going on. And as someone who generally perceives things that way, I don't think there is much of what I would consider high-quality argumentation that happens in America 2018, but so much the worse for that. Who cares? We'll do our best anyway.
Right. Sadly, but I guess it's just, we're already a couple of lonely Dawdlers anyway.
Oh, bother. So, let's talk briefly about a few of the considerations of some of the argumentation theorists before we get into a little bit more of what we have done with it. One of the things that's a big deal in just kind of the structure of argument in general, I think, is the pro and con. When they do competitive debate, etc., that is an enshrined structural necessity that they do. We have our resolution, and we have someone who speaks in favor and someone who is opposed.
Right.
When someone in the airport is making an argument as to why they shouldn't have to be the one who yet again takes the kid to the bathroom, but instead should be allowed to sit on their phone and watch the congressional testimony.
Ooh.
The person who puts forth the request, demand, claim would be taking this pro role, and then if anyone wanted to dispute that, they would be in another role. So are we willing to accept that as a structural necessity of arguments, that there's always a proponent and opponent? I kind of think so, but I also hesitate to ever make necessity claims.
You're stuck. You fucked yourself. I think I mean that's sort of a big question, right, at this stage of the episode. I don't know if that's a place. Is that a road you want to go down? Really?
Yeah, we can just throw it out there and come back to it probably after we
and
talk
that's a
about
fun
the
one
details.
too.
And because one thing that would make that even more relevant is that if, or to the extent, we chopped things up that way, and if one of our concerns was making some discourse norms, would there be different rules that applied to the person who puts forth a claim and the person who disputes, etc.? So that's one of the high-level things that we talk about in argumentation theory. Another is the work from J.L. Austin through our buddy John Searle on what they call speech acts and the pragmatic aspects of communication, which in this case does not mean pragmatic in the American pragmatist James Dewey Peirce sense, but rather means the non-semantic aspects that accompany production of a text, like body language, assumptions of what people do and don't know,
Hmm.
The force is the person making a joke? Are they making a demand? Are they making a request? What they call those different types of elocutionary or locutionary forces, etc. Whatever is not contained in the meaning of the words or the sentence, but rather environmental factors that contribute to the production of your argument. Or do we want to view the goings-on more like what they call the CRC model, the claims and accompanying reasoning? Is it more like that we are attempting to access propositions, these abstract semantic entities that sentences attempt to refer to, and that we try to purify argumentation from these pragmatic factors, so that these are two, again, kind of large scale lenses that different argumentation theorists look through. The extent to which they're concentrating on the entirety of the speech act and everything that comes with it, or if they're trying to be more sort of logical and abstract and just talk about the propositions. Joe Friday. Just the props, man.
That's pretty good. Okay. That's all interesting and good for me, but I feel like I need just a little bit more. Is there more that you're heading towards?
Sure. A related thing is an old-timey word from our buddy from a while ago, Aristotle, who talked about, I may be pronouncing it wrong, Enthymemes, which has nothing to do with Richard Dawkins. But the enthymematic character of arguments, which again can be debated, the extent to which it is necessary or ever present, or is only common to varying degrees. But the enthymemes are arguments that have tacit premises. And I think that the way I look at things, there are always going to be an indefinitely vast number of enthymematic premises in any argument, especially to the degree that I care about things like definitions. We will never define all the terms. You're going to rely on a connotation base, on a semantic groundwork almost all the time. You're going to rely on common patterns of inference. You're not going to always spell out your logic explicitly. You're going to rely on, for example, another thing we either have or soon will talk about, all these ceteris paribus clauses. Well, yeah, the match will light when struck if the humidity is this and the prevalence of oxygen in the atmosphere is Y, and So there's always, I think, accompanying an argument, a potentially an indefinitely large enthymematic accompaniment that is potential grounds for clever disputants to attempt to make relevant at any time. That even if, right. So you can always, I don't know, if you want to phrase it this way, it's a way to weasel or something. All right, you don't have any problems with the explicit premises of your argument, but you are trying to slip under the rug. You're trying to smuggle in this premise that you haven't stated but need in order to move from 3 to 4, blah, blah, blah. So that's a big deal, and it helps to have labels for things in order to talk about them subsequently. So that's another thing we can learn from argumentation theory and watch for as we're considering arguments. And then finally, just what's the point? What's the goal? Where is an argument headed? And that's where I suppose our two bugbears from the beginning can come up. the egalitarian would say, well, if to the extent there's a purpose in arguing at all, it's maybe just for fun, or to pass a philosophy class, or to write some poetry in a strange way with numbers next to the lines, or, the dogmatist, I don't think, sees much of a point. But anyway, a distinction that gets brought out in some of the argumentation theory literature is the difference between resolving or settling, and that's a large and relevant pragmatic difference in the way humans behave and will change the way systems evolve subsequent to arguments. Have they merely ended the debate? Well, they're kicking us out of the lecture hall. We've got to go. It just ends where it ends. Or we're going to agree to disagree. That would be what they call settling. For a resolution, the way I understand the terms, would entail a genuine agreement as to the local conditional status of the conclusion based on the argument. All right, well, I get it. If I accept these premises and those definitions and these rules of inference, then that conclusion appears to follow, and I'm going to adopt it with confidence level X for now until I hear a better one or do some further research, whatever. That any disputes that arise in the course of the argument are genuinely resolved.
Okay.
That's the kind of ending I like. Don't just settle. Let's not settle for settling.
Not settle for settling. I think settling no one would like, except for the person who's losing, who knows their side of the argument is not holding up or whatever. But resolving, if you're looking for agreement, I think resolution is the goal. And then I kind of want to go over speech acts and propositions one more time, just because to me, you've got resolve and settle, and I think I know where I would prefer, and I think most people would, well, that's not true, but resolutions would seem what you want, whereas these court hearings or whatever that we've got with Kavanaugh and everybody, they're probably just going to settle because majority wins or whatever. They're not actually going to sit there and try and work it out together. It would probably take too much time, or who knows. But the thing is the speech acts and propositions, that was pretty interesting to me. Speech acts, it sounded like you were pitting them like, do you want one or the other? Am I correct?
I don't know about one or the other. I think that everyone will agree that actual arguments take place in speech act terms. So another way to distinguish the two is speech acts are actual and propositions are virtual, or speech acts exist and propositions don't. Speech acts are the events that happen in space-time, in world, whatever. Right. When I say,
Premise 1, all men are mortal,
that's a speech act. I may or may not, in tokening that speech act, be successfully referencing a proposition, which is a more abstract semantic object in a sort of Platonic sense that some people believe in and some people don't.
Okay.
Or some people take the instrumentalist version towards and say, well, no, there aren't propositions, but it's still useful to talk as though there are for various purposes.
Okay.
And one of the standard things that usually comes up in discourses about propositions are alternate languages and the phrase, say the same thing. So there are various pragmatic,
quickly,
behavioristic... okay.
I'm just, when you say the same thing, you could say two languages get they have like share a common abstraction or something like that. Like there's an abstraction that the two then, in the concretization of their speech acts or something like that in different languages, they all both kind of like go back, like they're a lineage or something, and they go back to a point where they share something in common. Is that what that's trying to get at?
I don't know about the going back to aspect. I think it's contemporaneous.
Right, but
I was saying, like, there are various motivations to want to be able to say that an English speaker and a German speaker both think that snow is white or whatever.
Pass
Even
the
though
butter.
If you ask them to express it, and one says snow is white and one says shine and vice or whatever, I don't know very languages, but you make your favorite example, pass the butter versus blah 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 in Chinese, that they functionally equivalent, that we want to be able to talk about people as having some sort of shared doxastic framework. So that's the role that propositions play.
Okay.
Whatever it is that is shared by snow is white and shine and vice, they both mean, the proposition that English speakers token by saying snow is white.
Okay. Yeah. I just wanted to kind of go back to that one. But you pretty much have in your, just to kind of quickly, because you've gone over a number of little things, but just some of the background, talked about descriptive versus normative, talked about pro and con, and asked if it was necessary, but you're not sure if because you don't include necessity necessarily in your sorry, you don't include it, period. I don't know what you don't include it in. No, I'm joking. And then we got some speech acts, some propositions, some enthymemes, and then we want to have resolution, or we want to settle. Settling is you're getting kicked out of the bar. Resolutions are someone goes, okay, I agree, my argument stinks, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. I just wanted to touch on that because that's, just like we have in the prior episodes.
Some of the super basics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which to me, they're brand new. So I don't know how, you know what I mean? To me, it's like basics, It's like, you put me in like a fancy French kitchen or something and be like, okay, I want you to make a whatever, whatever the French make, and be like, it's basic. And I'd be like, okay. Popovers. Anyway, are those French? Whatever. Doesn't matter. We're moving on. Unless you feel like you want to
pop over to my neighbor's house sometimes.
Jesus Christ.
We're moving on. One of the problems is with trying to do a good job at anything is that we're fucking chimps, right? We're these wild animals, domesticated animals that have a evolutionary heritage and all kinds of unwanted problems that, again, as we keep growing older, only seem to get worse.
Oh, Jesus. The hardening of the chimp.
Yeah. Some parts harden.
That
some
could be,
parts
that could be like weird. So I take that back. Anyway. Oh, put it on Twitter.
But we can do some stuff. We can get to the moon, right? Oh, just alienated more audience members. We can build skyscrapers for other chimps to knock down later, and there's all this stuff we can do. It seems to me inductively reasonable to suggest that when we do cool stuff, when we accomplish big, impressive projects, other than perhaps taking over the world with our population explosion.
Foreshadowing.
That reminds me of a future episode. Most of the time that we're doing cool stuff, it's because we somehow attempt to transcend our chimpness through procedural development, aka science and engineering, maybe tiny parts of philosophy, sometimes. But that we do it through idealization. If you want to get something done, then you need to abstract. You need to forget details. If you need to take into account all of the details, you will never get out of bed because there's too much information compared to our chimpy nervous systems. So we have to forget a bunch of it, and then we have to pretend that we're doing things that we know damn well we're not doing. There are no straight lines. There are no triangular objects. Alienated another audience member that I used to know. But
if there's a preemptive alienation process, I think you've accomplished it.
Yeah, now one of my old acquaintances will turn it off and rage. Anyway, but we strive through kind of a back and forth process between material science and engineering and measurement to try to build straighter and straighter straight edges. A straight edge that appears straight enough at a date is later proven quite jagged when we increase our magnification abilities. And now this thing that we thought was straight appears under this magnification as a very pointy mountain range. So now we've got to figure out how to flatten those out and try to make things straighter and straighter. It's all this process of bouncing back and forth between the actual messy animal chimp world and the idealized world of Olympus, where there really are such things as triangles and propositions and straightness and circles and the realm of the gods.
Nice.
So a way that I like to think about that pattern is that actually we are always chimps. That's where it starts. It comes from the gritty, soft and hard and scratchy and bumpy and mixed up animal bodies. It's very embodied. But then those dirty chimps can attempt to use language and symbolism to tell stories about what they think the realm of the gods might be like. And then by striving to pull the chimps upward by their Achilles heels, they don't have bootstraps, right? That we can attempt to approximate, that we can try to strap some wings on and be school play level angels, right? I mean, right. We still can't fly and they fall off and whatever, but that we try to strap on some wings, and by telling stories about the gods, we can try to make the chimps angels. I don't know if that little poem works for you or means anything to you, but I think that describes science.
I love it. I don't know if it necessarily is only for science or, scientific endeavors. But I just think that's a really nice sequence, if you will, of, we're always chimps. We can be sometimes angels, but we'll never be gods. We'll never have straight lines. We'll never have perfect triangles. Yeah, and I like that a lot.
Because we also don't need them. We won't have them, but
yeah,
it doesn't matter because your projects are influenced by your concerns, and your concerns are localized to your place in history, in your environment, the body you're in, etc. So we don't need to be gods. But by playing at it, sometimes we can do better than we would otherwise.
Yeah, for sure. We have speech acts, but maybe we don't really have propositions. Is that also possible?
Yep. I mean, in this, to make that analogy here, the chimp would be the speech act, the god would be the proposition, and then the angel would be, I guess, what they called the rational reconstruction of the argument by a trained theorist. So you've got your two chimps arguing in the airport, and then you've got the abstract propositions that they're trying to play with or not. And then you've got the scientist in the background with their notepad out, and their, what do they call those? Pencil protectors or whatever. And they're pulling that, and they're writing down what these people are saying, and then they go back to the lab, and they reconstruct what they think was going on. That's kind of the angel level.
So you're saying that angels are dorks?
Big time.
Sweet.
It sounds better to say dorks are angels than angels are dorks.
Oh,
Maybe A is not A. You know what I mean? People don't like this kind of thing, but it works for me. That, all right, if A is A and you say angels are dorks, then dorks are angels and they're the same. But then consider the difference between those two, the pragmatic speech act level difference of the phrase, dorks are angels, to angels are dorks. And they're very different things.
That's true. It's kind of funny. But that's because we, in our enthymemic way, are smuggling in some things about angels that we use in one, permutation of it that we don't use in the other.
Right. A phrase that I like for this kind of thing is connotative pollution.
Excellent.
Since we have good connotations for the term angel and negative connotations with the term dork, it's an entirely different act in the speech act sense, in the what force does your locution have? Because one would be an insult and one would be a compliment.
Isn't that funny?
Though all you're really doing on a logical level is asserting an identity. If one is the other, then they both is themselves, and
Right. Fucking dorks and angels.
Anyway, we're referencing the general semantics episode. What was that? 7, 8, where we argued.
Honestly,
Alfred
I'm
Korzybski that A was not
a
A.
problem. I'm like, I have the same feeling. I'm like, 8? I don't know. Shit, I don't remember. Here we are making these things. We don't even know what we're doing. What am I did? Anyway.
So that's how I would also like to look at argument. That argument would be one of these godlike idealizations. And the practice of attempting to develop a procedure that most reliably led to chimp-level agreements might be, so that the God-level thing would be the discourse norms, and then the actual conversation is the chimp level. And then if, over time, your tribe, your troop, could get better and better at engaging in types of discourse that led to agreement, which then facilitated them to collaborate on their projects, then they're strapping their wings on.
So the best kind of strap on.
Oh my God. We're going to have to be we're going to be labeled explicit now. Fuck. We were so clean until that one.
Well, you got to, I don't know. It's true. It's like, Tourette'sy.
This is a family show.
Yeah, it's a family show. I wouldn't let my family listen to this, although they do. Hi, Mom.
I make my family listen to it.
Nice. Do you?
I sit them all down at gunpoint in the living room and crank it up.
You do have guns. I believe you. Yeah. Shout out to the moms and dads out there. Hide your.
Are you making this political again?
Hide your guns. Well, I hope not. Continue, sir.
All right, where am I?
Oh.
All right, so that's what I don't. Okay, one thing I want to do. One of the hardest things in my lifelong project of attempting to develop a scheme, a philosophy,
Yes.
is to get people to join me at this point, at the point of, okay, we are skeptics. We've abandoned the truth. God damn it. What are we going to do? Because we got stuff to do, and now there's nobody up in the sky telling us where to go, and we are at sea. We are lost.
Are we going to train?
And I want them to get on the argument train.
Oh, cool.
But since I'm already on the train, I'm kind of like, well, I don't know. That's what I got. I got a train. So how do you, through using train technologies, convince everybody else to get on the train? You know, how do you argue people into respecting arguments? And I think that's a good puzzle that I have not yet solved.
Well, what's before you get into your next move, I love that you talked about the train as a train, but prior to that, I was joking about the Korzybski thing where we would go and train from the. It was 2 episodes ago.
Ah, yeah, training.
So you were, talking about you want people to join you, and I'm like, to train? Anyway, you were like, yes, we'll get on the train, and I was like, oh, okay.
This is another inefficiency, I would call it a flaw, of English.
Yeah.
Homonyms, what are these things? Where, bank and whatever, they got this, you use the same word, but it has drastically different meanings. Those are really dumb, and we should get rid of them.
I think, isn't that one of the troubles of learning English if it's not your, it's probably the troubles of learning English if it's your first language. Probably like, well, that doesn't make any sense. I mean, I know, like, I have a 6-year-old who's learning, how to read words and things like that, and at times I find myself in that pickle where I'm just like, shit, that where I have to sit there and be like, well, it means this in this instance, and this other instance it's spelled differently, and it means this. Sometimes it's not spelled differently. It sucks. Fucking idiots. Why did we do this? Laziness.
Inertia.
Yeah. Christ.
Conservatism.
Nice. Goddamn conservatives.
It's wrong everywhere, even when it's not in the congressional chamber. What do they call these fucking things?
I don't know, but I'm sure there's a fucking name for it. God damn it. Let's just get all the swears out of the way right now.
Oh, we'd run out of time before I was done. I listened to Brett Kavanaugh talk all day yesterday. I got enough swear words.
I like beer. All right. Jesus. We're being too current eventy. We're not.
What kind of beer? What are you blackout on, Amy Klobuchar? How dare you ask me? What are you? Oh, your dad was an alcoholic and this is touchy. Oh, man. All right. Well, I'm sorry.
I believe you. Fucking.
This is not that kind of show.
It's just not. So let's.
We don't care. We are apolitical.
Let's just be careful. That's all I ask. Because I don't know. Anyway. Yeah, I guess it's not that kind of show. Oh, Ooh, but we are chimps, so we can't say that we're apolitical. As
I
chimps, all the time, as you say. Christ, you know, we hear a certain vocalization out there. We go, oh, that's my brother. I have to go kill some other chimps. Anyway, so okay, let's just.
So I want other people to care about argument also. And I don't know how to do that really. But one of the premises that I have access to, because it was said and not disputed earlier, but you can now if you need to, is that everybody argues already. So maybe you can bring most people onto the train by saying, well, you've been on trains since you were a baby. You know trains, you like trains. You just weren't on this great fancy new one I've got. You got to check out my train.
Ooh, wait.
Because, yeah.
Yeah, and before you do, I have to throw a wrench in this whole thing.
Finally.
What is an argument? If everyone argues and they just been on some shitty trains and you got a nice one, then if we're talking about trains, then, you know, going from there to argument, what is an argument? You know, what's a shitty argument? What's a shiny new argument? Who cares about those actual things? What is an argument? Do you have a definition, or is that a nice little wrench that I've thrown in?
I've got too many definitions.
I just need one.
But I don't have any of them pulled up.
All right. Well, while you're pulling it up.
So here's Wilard's definition. Oh, okay.
Well, no, if you got one, let's do this, baby.
Earlier, Wilard was being flights of fancy, but in his definition of argument, he is concise.
Sweet. I knew he was a good writer.
Arguments are conversations in which opposition is present.
Period.
Ooh. I like that.
So he has a very, very expansive one. Because he just stresses that he's one of the descriptivists, pretty much.
Okay.
You know, he's interested in what people are doing.
Mm-hmm.
For him, argument is a form of communication. And then the subtype of communication atoms that count as arguments are those which have opposition.
Cool. I like it.
There are things I like about it, but ultimately I don't like it. That's too broad. It doesn't get us anywhere, I don't think. I don't know what to do with that.
Well, I mean, it sounds to me like it's one of those kind of flavors, you know? Here's two chimps communicating. You know, sometimes it has this flavor, sometimes it has that flavor. One of the flavors is argument. That's how I see what he's trying to say. Now, of course, I've not read any of his stuff. This Wilard dude is new to me, although I like him very much already.
He's got a likable face.
You're a fucking normative guy. So if he's descriptive, you're going to be like, that's not satisfying enough for my normative tastes. But I would say that to me, that sounds very, very much a particular flavor of conversation. And the ingredient is opposition. You know, and that's what it sounds like to me. Now, but enlighten me further as to why, you know, you're not like screaming at it, but you would prefer something else. Like, what is it? What is it? Just go.
My preferred definition for argument is objective in the sense that it's, for me, arguments, the way I use the term, are objects. And for Wilard, they were more like events. They were conversations happening amongst people at a place and time, and it's this extended thing, and it has only one necessary characteristic of opposition being present. My definition of argument is that they are
complex linguistic objects made of premises and conclusions whose purpose is to persuade.
So mine's a teleological, objective definition. That it's about these premise-conclusion sets that are designed to be marshaled in Wilard-style arguments, in conversations. For the proponent, the claimant, the person who wants to positively put something forth, this would be that which he or she uses to attempt to persuade an audience of one or more other chimps to agree with the claim.
He or she? How binary centrist of you.
God damn it, yeah, right.
So, okay. Complex linguistic objects whose purpose is to persuade. And you mention premises and conclusions. Are those necessary? Or is it just, it can be rhetoric, it can be whatever the linguistic object is, its purpose is to persuade. It's like you said, teleological.
I find them criterial. The way that I use language, I think we should restrict the term argument to be relatively narrow and to only apply to these premise conclusion set thingies. So that I realize that my definition, that proposed definition, is much more restrictive than common English usage and much more restrictive than most academic usage as well, but I still like it.
No, then that's fine, but to go to the train analogy or whatever, you were talking earlier about like shiny trains versus shoddy trains or whatever, and is a train or is it not? You know what I'm saying? So Wilard, I think is more in the spirit of it being, like the train, and even though you're talking about events and objects, and maybe we might want to think about trains as objects or something like that. It seems more like he's getting to the underlying pieces, criteria, whatever. And that, it's a conversation whose opposition, where opposition is present. And so there's that kind of train. And then there's these other kinds of trains. And some of these conversations where opposition is present might have highly detailed premises and conclusions. And other ones might not. Some might be arguments from ignorance, or how they kind of arguments from analogy, arguments from they have all these various different ways that they talk about kinds of arguments, but at the base they are conversations where opposition is present. So complex linguistic objects whose purpose is to persuade, I think also can be like that. But if premises and conclusions are criterial, as you said, then I worry that we start to move away from just dispute, and it's much more structured and organized, and it is much more specialized. Maybe that's the other way. What do you think about that?
I agree, it's more specialized.
Okay.
When I'm going about defining terms, one of the things that I sometimes do, though it's very fallible and just a broad heuristic, but is just to think of particular turns of phrase, not turns of phrase, particular, I call them conceptual holes, things that I want to say. And then I think, well, does my definition allow me to say what I want to say while restricting the right domain of inappropriate usage? to me, I want to be able to say, I sat alone in the woods and wrote an argument. Here it is. I can now present it to you. Here's my argument. I wrote it in the woods alone earlier today. I want to be able to say that. If you strictly use the Wilard definition, you would not be. That would be inappropriate. And then I think if you do the Wilard style, then you also countenance things that I don't. You let in too much. You've got the two drunks at the bar incoherently shouting at one another, clearly in opposition. But neither one makes an argument. One says, Toby Keith is the greatest musician ever. And the other one says, he's a hack. You know, there's no arguments made there. You have two opposing views. The views are being expressed with passion. Neither side is making an argument.
I thought it was taste great, less filling. Sorry.
Maybe that's what I think of Willard's definition.
Well,
maybe it tastes great to you, but it doesn't work.
It's less filling to me. There was a sorry, but when I lived in Maine, there was a commercial for this outfit called Hammond Lumber, and there would be two guys, and one would say ham and cheese, and the other would say ham and eggs, and they would yell at each other back and forth like ham and cheese, ham and eggs, and eventually I think the guy who owned the place was like, he'd kind of part them and he'd just be like ham and lumber. Anyway, sorry.
What? Oh, is that the name of it? Oh, I think I even missed the first part. It sounds like a local TV ad for a place called Hammond Lumber.
Yes,
is that
exactly.
What you said?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
So, ham and cheese, ham and eggs, ham and lumber.
Ham and lumber. Nice. Local color.
Anyway, but okay, so you want to be able to say like,
yeah, so I'm saying that's opposition, but
right. That's not an argument. Just yelling ham and cheese.
Yeah.
Oh, that's hilarious. Sorry, I haven't enjoyed a silliness that much in a while. And I have two young children. So, okay. I don't object to your need for objects. Okay. So I don't have I like where you're going with this. What I am still trying to get at, though, is then, a train's not a train, right? It's or whatever it is to have, gears and wheels running on a track or whatever. However it's powered, that is the definition of train or whatever the fuck. Definition of argument is not just simply a complex linguistic object, though, right? There's the criteria. It sounds like you said you want to sit alone in the woods and write an argument and then be able to just literally hand it in, and more or less as someone digests what they're reading. Does that, I guess really what I'm trying to get at is, does that necessarily mean that you've written premises and conclusions, and every time anyone does anything that you would call an argument, there will be premises and conclusions?
The second part, yes, that's what I'm pushing, or that's how I do it. And I was acknowledging earlier that I don't think that's how most people do it. For example, I'm thinking of standardized testing. Often, right? Like ACT, SAT, whatever, GRE type tests will have in part of the language section of the test, they'll have a little short text that you will read, and then they will ask you, what arguments was the author making here? And obviously there are no numbered premises and conclusions in there. So this restricted version that I'm putting forth is narrower than common English usage, America 2018, but I think that's a good thing. I don't care.
I kind of feel like for Wilard, you'd be Crocodile Dundee saying, that's not a knife, this is a knife, and for you, you're saying like, that's not a fork or whatever. This is a fork. You have a knife. I have a fork. Like that's kind of thing. And you stop saying that's a fork. It's a knife, or something along those lines. Would you agree with that assessment of the two definitions and the approaches that are being put forth or whatever taken?
Yes, asterisk. Referred to asterisk at bottom of page. As a general semanticist, I don't claim that anything is or isn't an argument. These are just terms that we invent and we can choose to apply however we want. No either linguistic object or event in the world really is or isn't an argument. That's not how it works. But we just get to, as normative semanticists, get to choose what we are going to use as our definition. Then we can hold that definition up to something and see whether or not it meets the criteria. That's all that's happening. But otherwise, yeah, that's not a knife, is what I'm doing.
I thank the offspring of Data and Spock for that delicious asterisk footnote. Okay. But, so, and I don't know if we spent too much time on definition of argument, but it's not in your shit yet, so now it is. And I like that we've gone here. I'm sorry. I'm not
Me too.
sorry.
All is well.
Anyway, then would you be willing to change your definition? Or do you think complex linguistic object is enough, whether it has premises or conclusions or not?
I am not willing to change it. Dogma. No. I still think the premises conclusion thing is important. But another thing that I think, I don't even know a term for this. I don't know if it's a position right now in our intellectual community. Someone who is an argument file, an argument fetishist, an argument lover, and who thinks that this is how we ought to adjudicate all disputes or potential disputes. I think that one can argue about definitions, about what we are going to choose to use as the periphrastic expansion of our singular terms, so that there might be an argument to be made about what the definition of argument ought to be. So I would argue, to use the verb form, see, but we're doing a little bit of, even that phrase is a little, I know what just happened. But anyway, I would argue that this is the definition of argument that we ought to use. There's another ought. We gotta have
Normative.
this meeting.
Piece of shit. Anyway, go.
But yeah, I want to use this one, and this is what I'm gonna use for the rest of at least tonight. Though it's, of course, it's all up for debate. Ultimately. Because, and so the quick pseudo version, which is not a Harland type argument for this, the gist of it just is that premise conclusion form is very efficient to facilitate disputes. And so we maybe can come back to this at the last step when we talk about disputational behavior in general.
Mm-hmm.
So let me just throw at you the most current formulation of what I call the argument, the set of premises and conclusions whose purpose is to persuade you or anyone else that they should engage in, rely on, utilize arguments more.
Okay.
Premise 1.
Reliable concordances are engineerable. What does that mean? Concordance definitionary style definition means being of one mind. The Harland style definition is realizing the same outputs when given the same inputs. The short version is just agreement. And then engineerable is like, well, they can be made and improved upon in the sense I was talking about earlier with straight edges, and we can engage in these ping-pongy processes of perfection over time, and the chimps can tell stories about the gods and whatever. So that's the first premise. Reliable concordances are engineerable. Second premise, agreement facilitates progress. Talked a little bit about that earlier. All I really mean by that is, the way that I like to say it is, the sub-argument for that is, two chimps together can lift a rock that one chimp cannot. Just that if they can agree to utilize their energy in a collaborative way, they can achieve projects that neither alone, without technological improvement, could achieve. Premise 3, argument is the most efficient manner for resolving disputes. The enthymematic surrounding mist between those two premises that I will make explicit for now is agreement and disputes are kind of the two sides of the coin. If there's a dispute, there's not agreement, and if you agree, there's no dispute. So that if we accept premise 2, that agreement facilitates progress, and enthymematically again that we value progress, then we want to resolve disputes. So that's kind of the little 2A between 2 and 3. And also exemplifies what that new vocab term means for you. Yeah. So 3 was argument is the most efficient manner for resolving disputes. And already, so now I notice as I'm saying it that that's kind of an equivocation, because now I've shifted to argument being an event. So what that should say is something like a process of disputation arranged around the exchange of arguments, if I wanted to make sure to stick to argument meaning the objects. Not that anyone else is tracking that verbally right now, but I realized as I'm saying it that premise equivocates. Hopefully it is fixed. Conclusion. Therefore, to the extent that we value making progress, we ought to attend to engineering and abiding by some set of discourse norms for the construction and exchange of arguments. Harland-style arguments work better in text than in podcast form, because it's nice to be able to reference the text back, because to really be specific and stick to precise formulations. But it came at you anyway.
Arguments?
Might there be another? Is there a meme here? Yeah, all right. So sometimes I call them arguments. So what? What you gonna do about it?
Nothing. Continue.
Comments? No, that was the conclusion.
Oh. Jesus. Well, all right.
Were you writing it all down? No. So did anything get stimulated in your chimp here?
Has anything here stimulated my chimp?
Well, whatever. Do you have anything to say about the argument?
Well, thank God there's editing, because you've been breaking up a little bit. Do you mind repeating yourself, the last thing you said?
Well, I don't know what you heard and didn't hear. The argument without extrapolation.
No, I heard that. You just
you
the
don't
last
want,
thing
you don't
said.
want it. Okay. Oh, I'm just saying. Well, so I ran through that. What go wherever you want to go now. Like, do you have anything to say about it?
About the argument.
Yeah.
And this is, would you say you define the argument as a process of disputation arranged around argumentative events? Is that fair?
Maybe. Yeah, that might be close enough. I mean, the conclusion, again, you know, it's normative. It's got a big fat odd in it, like you always love, and I keep doing it to you. The point of this, again, in general, was to attempt to persuade audiences to value and engage in the exchange of arguments whenever they need to collaborate to achieve projects, which I think is often. They should start constructing and exchanging arguments as a way to reach agreements and get together to do shit.
Well, I want something, I want something in between. Like, okay, this word argument's getting thrown around. We've worked with a few definitions. We've launched into the argument. And I need to be able to set aside some of the baggage to say, okay, well, this other thing is now not what we're going to talk about as an argument. And it complicates things a little bit by talking about events versus objects, in my opinion. So I want to be able to say, okay, well, is Wilard talking about dispute and not argument? You know what I mean? Like, can we set his definition aside as dispute and then be able to improve your definition of argument to include, you know, more of the structure that I think you are leaning towards, so that then we can say, yeah, the only time you're actually arguing, you're not asserting, you're not disputing, you're not whatever, is when you include premises and conclusions in a particular pattern that is somewhat internally consistent enough, and we can kind of resolve the disputes that way. Did any of that make sense?
Yeah, I think so, and
Okay.
I like it if I'm getting it right. That I might advocate calling Willard's definition any conversation that includes opposition. Maybe I'd want to call that just a dispute. And then my claim is, the claim of the argument is using arguments is the best way to resolve disputes.
Right. Okay.
Yep.
So long as we have that, I'm fine. I'm like, okay, sure. So we're gonna bring argument to a higher level than just mere like ham and cheese, ham and eggs, ham and lumber.
Yeah. Then one of them says to the other, all right, so let's take this step by step. Let's treat you as the proponent in this dispute. And what's your claim? Ham and eggs. Okay, that now becomes your claim. So you make the claim, I don't immediately buy it, because I think ham and cheese. So now we have a dispute, because I don't buy your claim. So then, what I do is say, all right, what's your argument? Give me your argument for ham and eggs. Why should I agree ham and eggs? And then it's the ham and eggs guy's job to make and present a set of premises that has the conclusion ham and eggs. The claim becomes the conclusion that needs to be derived, and the argument is the motivation or reasoning that we should agree. Oh yeah, all right, ham and eggs. I get it.
This has immediately risen to the top of the list of my favorite things we've done. So good. Oh, fucking beautiful. Yes, Harland. Yes.
And then those two go at it for a while, and they think that they have reached a resolution, and it happens to be ham and cheese, because ham and eggs, what the fuck, no. So they resolve on ham and cheese, but then this ignorant yokel with an accent comes in and goes ham and lumber, and now we've got a new dispute, and those people need, now all three, they have to resolve that.
Right. Hopefully without the one defecting back to ham and eggs.
Oh, that would be a disaster. We can't fracture apart because, and they can't, in my opinion.
Ooh.
And, this is one of my personal favorite of my inflammatory claims, because I get so much pushback on it, and I'm not even really sure why yet, other than the conservatism of loving cliches. And we're probably not going to be able to go into the whole thing right here, because I could say it and then you can say, what's your argument? Because this might even deserve a whole show, whatever. But claim! Reasonable people cannot disagree.
Nice. Fucking explosions. I know other people have big issues with that, and originally I was apathetic, and then I feel like in the past you've laid out your reasoning for why you make that claim, which I guess maybe becomes an argument at some point, but I don't have an issue with that, you just have to define what reasonable people are.
Yeah, it all becomes wrapped up into the definitional framework, web, whatever. Because then I get to have a pretty clear and easy definition for reasonable if you accept my other definitions, because reasonable just means sensitive to arguments. So that if the agents that are engaging in disputational discourse are all mutually doxologically sensitive to these complex linguistic arguments whose purpose is to persuade, and they talk long enough, and so this will be a place where I can fill in a little bit more about some of the characteristics that I think, if we accept the argument and we become arguers as our disputation resolution method, what are some of the core concepts that most or all arguments probably should include in order to be effective persuaders? And the major ones on the tip of my tongue are, what are your definitions? What's your logic? What are your rules of inference? What are you allowed to derive from what?
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like there was supposed to be a third one.
No.
Do you recall? This part I didn't have written down.
Genius. No, I don't recall.
So I want to know what your terms mean, and I want to know what you're doing, and what's your argument, whatever. But if it seems to me that two people who are both sensitive to argument should be able to employ a computer analogy, run the same program, get the same inputs into the parameters of the program, and get the same outputs. To me, that claim is not more contentious than the claim pocket calculators are reliable adders.
Mm-hmm.
We've made these systems that they are the way they are because they concord a lot. When you push 2 and plus and 2 on 2 different calculators, most of the time you will see on their screens isomorphic symbols.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that's what reasonable people can't disagree at the end of a communication process after exchanging all of their arguments. If everybody knows what all of the words included mean and what the rules of inference are, they should reach a conditional agreement at the end to, if I accept A, B, C, D, then, yeah, I guess the answer's 4. Like you said.
Yeah.
It's always open in the process, in the procedure, for them to then go back and dispute any piece of it. If your argument were accepted at face value, I would agree with the conclusion, but I dispute premise 2 because it's bullshit. Or, I think your definition for argument is poor, and I don't accept it. I prefer this one, and then they argue about that. Or they dispute about that. See, even I fucked this up.
No, but that, and we just distinguished it today or whatever. Anyway, that's my contribution to this conversation. So, the one thing that stands out to me is that when you say reasonable people can't disagree, where people tend to go, like kind of automatically, is that's God's territory. You know, to fit this into the chimps, angels, gods,
yep,
framework. And I think that's kind of where you're saying, no. You know, this is just, this is just schoolyard angels or whatever you were talking about with the, pocket calculators or whatever. You put 2 plus 2, you get 4. It's inputs and outputs, and that's the idea. Taking that a little bit further, I do think that it's sort of like, hold on. I do think that it's sort of a bit of a callback, I guess. Shit, I lost it. Hold on. I got distracted by something. Oh, shoot.
I'm going to lob another thing at your head while you're trying to figure it out then, because dead air is not acceptable. I got another meme to throw out. The way I phrase this thing is between provocative formulations and defensible formulations. Reasonable people can't disagree is a provocative formulation. I wouldn't defend it as stands. I realize that it is flawed in many ways. The reason it takes that form is that it's emulating one of the tropes, reasonable people can disagree is a way that people settle often. We don't like settling. I don't accept it. So then I just phrase it as reasonable people can't disagree so I can get everybody's chimp up and, get things moving. But reasonable people is a chimp level concept, and the idealized version, the God level concept, and that which would play the sentential role in the defensible formulation would be something like rational agents.
Right.
I'm willing to accept that no actual people, no domestic chimps ever really are rational agents completely. That's a God level thing. So that the defensible formulation would be something like, at the end of a successful communication procedure, rational agents will always reach concordant judgments. Or something wordy and whatever, complicated like that. So then, if we accept that on the God level, then the chimps, it seems to me, ought to strive to reach agreements. If they think that ideally rational agents would agree, then it seems like they would want to strive to agree.
So, I've had a little bit of a I won't say it's a breakthrough, but I have a thought. When you provoke, and people kind of in the right way, it sounds almost now, go into the God level of this, chimps, angels, gods framework. I don't know. We gotta shorten that up to like the CAG framework or CAG or whatever you want to call it.
Gack.
It. I know, Jesus Christ. It's the same thing with truth business. It's the same thing with enemy skepticism. It's the same thing with general semantics. It is the same thing with this. People go, well, that's the realm of the gods. I am but a lowly chimp. Impossible! You're asking me to do a lot of work, but I want to be a chimp and pretend in my head. I want to think I can be an angel, But people don't reserve themselves the capacity to be gods. And so, if anything, people operate as if it is just chimps and angels. And that really, somewhere deep down, when you push them, when you provoke them, they go, I can't be an angel, let alone a god. I just pretend. Just when I'm by myself, like Ralphie in A Christmas Story or whatever, where, everybody's like, Ralphie, you're so great. And he has these, big dreams or whatever that are completely ridiculous. The dreams of a child, they have no basis in, what they actually encounter day to day. That's kind of what it seems like. You're asking people to do a lot. They need training.
Get on the train or get out of the way. I don't care if they don't do it, but if they don't do it, then shut the fuck up and listen to those of us who do. You're making me get political again. I realize that most chimps are lazy, and I'm lazy about most things. I'd like to think that I'm not lazy in epistemology. So it doesn't really bother me if most people don't want to do this. But if you don't want to put in the work to construct and exchange arguments, then you should just buy tickets to the flight and not be an engineer. We do it everywhere else. People are totally comfortable taking their car into the mechanic because that is an expert, and they have not spent the time and done the work to master combustion engines, but someone else has. So I will, when I have a combustion engine problem, take it to the mechanic, give them a little bit of medium of exchange, and accept their expertise. People seem, in America 2018, to be hesitant to consult the experts in philosophy, though, so I have sympathy for that, and so am I, because most of them suck, but
so are you saying
it's the principle of the thing.
Are you saying that these passengers should just appeal to an authority and say, argumentation is not my thing. These people have sat there with premises and conclusions, and they have, come to this agreement, follow it.
Yeah.
Same thing with these people have spent all this time learning how to work with car engines. Let them fix it. Trust when you get back in the car, it's going to be better than it was when you brought it in.
Yep.
Interesting. I think that's a fascinating thing to I mean, that would that would raise it to the level that we raise everything else, like lawyers, doctors, whatever.
Self-serving much? Philosopher?
But like
Can you tell a story that elevates you from a podcast host to whom no one listens into being a doctor or a lawyer, and finally your father will respect you?
Nice.
I'm aware of
Amen.
this, of the psychological irony or whatever, but that has nothing to do with it. It's not an argument, and it's still wrong.
I like it. We should have. Yeah, we need to revert to the talking like Bill Maher. Okay, so shut the fuck up. Okay. Okay.
New rule.
New rule.
If you don't know how to argue, get the fuck out. And listen to me.
Yeah. That's it, basically. Well, I am not dissatisfied. So, where else do we go from here?
Well, I don't know. Disputes, as we've mentioned on previous episodes, fill airtime more than agreements. So we go through the argument, and we say, all right, I guess arguments they're okay. They might have a use, might make some sense some of the time. And we go through a little bit about what makes for a persuasive argument, or an argument that often will tend towards resolution rather than further dispute or settling, such as working on definitions. We could, I suppose, attempt to extend out this core set of discourse norms that we think do well to work toward dispute resolution.
Okay. Or you could just come up with an argument, and we could try and work it out. I mean, you've laid out a number of premises and conclusions for arguments. I get that. So maybe we could lay it out again, and I can see if I can, like the argument, for instance, or something else. Doesn't matter. Or do what you want to.
Yeah, I don't really want to go back to that one. We already kind of did it twice just to save boredom and repetition on people. And I didn't bring with me at this moment other explicit arguments. If you want to hear some more,
Nice.
check out episode 6. I think there were a bunch of them presented at that one.
Oh yeah,
But the skepticism one had a bunch of arguments, and there will be more in the future.
Yep. Indeed. I mean, we can.
Or we could close.
Yeah, I mean, we can close. I think. I mean, so I'm not. It doesn't have to be 2 hours. I mean, it's so far I've got an hour and 45 more or less. So I don't know. I mean, I think we accomplished a lot, to be honest with you.
Stop wrapping up. I have it. We're back on.
Oh shit. Go.
I'm not going to break this 2-hour thing. The rule was no new ideas after 2 hours.
That's right.
And I'm making this be 2 hours.
All right.
Here's something
Go.
related, but we haven't touched on yet, that they call the burden of proof.
Sweet.
Maybe we can disagree about the burden of proof.
Let's try.
So this, to me, we can kind of go back to the whole pro and con thing, or the whole general structure of disputational conversations.
Yeah.
That, or to the extent that we're going to accept that they start with a proponent that's going to make some kind of claim. My version, my preferred account of burden of proof, again, is a simple one. If you accept my other definitions, not all of which are simple, but if you do, then burden of proof comes easy, because I just get to say, the burden of proof is always on the proponent, period, done, easy. Anyone who wants to make a positive claim has the burden to argue for that claim. In other words, every audience can always say, what's your argument? Every time a claim is made. And the person who makes the claim has the burden. Not everyone agrees with that. I don't know. We'll find out if Ryan does or not. One of the common alternatives is the burden of proof falls on anyone who makes an extraordinary claim. If you do it that way, then there would be certain claims that are made that would not have a burden. And if someone demanded an argument, then the claimant would say, I don't need to argue for this because it's already status quo. And if you want to dispute it, then it's your burden to dispute it. If I want to just say, this is a beer bottle, then you're the one who has the burden to prove to me that it's not. Because there's a prejudice in favor of whatever the status quo is.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the most common other one. That's the one that I run into the most as the two choices for burden of proof. You got a preference or a third one?
No, but I thought of something, and I don't know if it's bullshit or not. The claimant, let's break it up into you've got a claimant and a disputant or something, let's just say.
Yep.
The claimant has the burden of proof, and the disputant has the burden of disproof. I don't know. I think let's do it. If you object to something, if you are disputing a particular, let's say we've got some real arguers here and they've got premises and conclusions and shit. If you have a problem with the premise, you can't just say, I got a problem with that premise. Or, I don't believe that claim. Well, why? What's the disproof? Because everybody's got baggage that they come with. So if you're saying, I don't believe that claim, if no one's laid out even an argument for it, you can say, sure, hey, lay out your argument. That's fine. But I don't see that as necessarily the burden of proof weighing heavy on the claimant. I see it when it becomes the, if one was to be able to say, what is it about the claim? Reasonable people can't disagree. If someone were to say, I want to see, like, bullshit, I want to see an argument or whatever, I would like to think that one person could say, the claimant could say, well, what is it at first that is disturbing to you? Before I give you everything, I want to know first what I'm dealing with. And so then maybe the person could at least say what was so unsavory about it for them. And then you could be like, well, good thing, because my argument doesn't include any of that shit. Here's the proof. And then you can give it to them and then go, oh, okay, good. Because I had these conceived notions about what you were saying. I have my own burden of disproof that I have to get over. I'm just winging it. Go.
Even in the way you present them, they are asymmetrical, right?
Yeah.
So I think my biggest problem with with that suggestion is that I just wouldn't like to call them, I wouldn't like to label them so similarly because they're so different. I don't want to call the other one a burden of disproof, but it's more like you're just doing a favor to the proponent. You're helping them construct what the proponent would basically be saying, well, what sort of argument would be persuasive to you? If that's the purpose, if that's what I'm trying to do, is persuade you, the burden of disproof, in your sense, sounds like a proponent assist. The opponent is saying, well, here's the part that I find the most troubling, so were your argument to address that, then you would be done. And to me, that's just very different, and therefore I wouldn't want to give it such a symmetrical label for such an asymmetrical thing. And that it's not really a burden, because you can... all they need to do is simply demand an argument, and that move is always a legal move, according to our rule set. So this is kind of an optional aside where the disputant could, were they to choose to, help out the proponent, which is good. I mean, I think I would rather view these things in general, these disputational engagements, as collaborations rather than competitions.
Yeah.
I'm not a big fan of the whole adversarial advocacy style lawyering and debating.
Sure.
I think it's better to just look at, well, we as a community want to reach a resolution in the sense of, at the end of this communication procedure, we all want to have the same judgments. And that the best way to get there is not establishing arbitrary advocates for all the alternative positions that we can come up with and having that person attempt to present the best case and then adjudicating amongst those. I think that's a terrible way to go about it. So what you're suggesting I like, in that it is collaborative. I guess I just don't like the term burden of disproof, because I don't think it's a burden, and I don't think it's similar enough to the burden of proof that we want to label it that similarly, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that sounds fine. Immediately I'm like, well, what can I, instead of burden, but that doesn't have to happen tonight. I just used it, and you were like, we could stretch this to 2 hours, and I was like, yeah. So
are you just with me on the two accounts of burden of proof that I laid out, that you also prefer the one where we just lay the burden on anyone who makes a positive claim, period, rather than the burden lies with anyone who strays from the circle? That that in any tribe or something, there's a status quo. And those things, if you say something that's not taboo in any way, these are already established. It's very, again, kind of conservative and establishmentarian, I think. That if these set of claims need no argument because they are already enshrined in our citadel, but these others, they require burden, so that even someone who just wanted to dispute, that's how you could get a burden of disproof, I guess, in your sense.
yeah, I mean, one is a clarification, and the other one is like exaggerated in how biased it is. The clarification is just, wanting an argument for a claim. I agree. I know.
Bastard.
We're like,
we have to disagree
well,
about something, because then we can go back and forth for an hour. I was trying to
get to the point where I was going to say, and I guess I'm saying it now, are we two reasonable people?
Badum-ching. Yeah. We are TOO reasonable.
Pat myself on the back. Can you hear this? Back. Yeah. You have this fetish with 2 hours. It's that.
Yeah. These things are going to be out there. So most of the time, most people aren't going to listen to them anyway. But they may run their eyes down the list. And if every number was 2 something, and then one of them was 1 something, that's just offensive. It's not aesthetically pleasing.
So true. Shit, we agreed again.
Are there, or should there be, this is too easy for reasonable people. Are there or should there be topics that are off limits for some reason or other? again, since there's only two reasonable people here, it might not go anywhere. I think there are lots of people out there, not too distant, especially from you, given where you reside,
Little Beirut,
who think that tons of things should be off limits. And, okay, so and this kind of harkens to the burden of proof thing, too, and it harkens to the goddamn Kavanaugh shit. Should we place a burden on accusers or whatever? So, first of all, should this be a limit? Should we not even talk about this?
Oh.
Is there anything that we shouldn't talk about? Including these intense traumatic experiences, like assaults, whatever. Should those be in some way off limits? Or should attempting to dispute certain claims be off limits? As I think someone who might use the phrase, we should believe the women. We should believe the accusers or whatever. I think they might not like the burden of proof version that I was putting forth earlier, where anyone who makes a claim is the one with the burden. They might think that there are certain claims, due to just the nature of the discussion itself, that the burden should automatically be shifted to the disputant. No, I didn't get drunk and push anyone into a bedroom, etc. I didn't. I don't know.
Well, I have thoughts.
Well, thank God. Spew them.
There's a sort of a dilemma, with the argumentation theorist raised to the level of the surgeon. Now these people can't make claims because now they have the burden of proof to go through an argument. But I've never flown a plane before. The engines are out and I got to figure out how to land it. That sucks, Or, the issue then becomes, well, what are all claims, can you call out all claims for an argument? Or can claims just settle into dispute? So are there some claims where it is more reasonable to ask for an argument? And are there some claims where it's less reasonable? But then you have reasonable as defined in a circular way as sensitive to arguments. So then, is there another word besides reasonable? Because I know you don't like logical. You want to say logicable or something, which would be more or less a synonym with reasonable, I suppose. So what's the other word that people can use when they got to make a claim? When they say to their parents, I was raped, and dad goes, what's your argument? So that, so I get it that we've got these surgeon level argumentation theorists who may be the best people to, along with maybe other people who've figured out how to do this stuff too, to come up with real good arguments for things. But again, now we've got people who are mechanics fixing the plane engine, and there are people who are just on the plane as it flies, But is this the same thing then? When, do claims fit into all, is it always going to fall into this circumstance, I guess, where someone can be like, well, premises and conclusions, Blasey Ford, I guess that's what I was thinking when you said that.
That's my current position, I guess. The way that I think those questions should be answered is that nothing is off limits and that the burden is always on someone who makes a claim. There are all sorts of other, again, pragmatic in the broad sense, reasons not to demand that a burden be fulfilled in any moment. One of which would be literally, if dad's sitting at home watching the New York Giants and the daughter comes through the door bedraggled and says, "I was raped," it would be extremely impolitic, impolite, cruel. There's many reasons not for the father to say, "What's your argument?" But that doesn't mean that ideally the person making the claim doesn't, in some abstract sense that doesn't need to be fulfilled in most circumstances, have a burden of proof. And then by the time they get to the place where we're at some sort of trial / job interview / whatever this shit that they're doing in Washington is, then we can talk about, okay, well, now is this the context in which requesting the burden of proof be fulfilled? Is that acceptable? So I guess what I'm saying is the burden would still be there, but there are many contextual circumstances in which requesting that the burden be fulfilled is inappropriate. If that answers your question or makes sense.
But then at the trial, would you then say evidence is a premise? Because isn't that what a lot of these people would ask for, is show me the evidence, that.
Yep.
So evidence.
Evidence for me would be a subtype of premises. There would be evidentiary premises.
And then you would construct your argument for the event that took place based on likely some evidentiary premises and maybe some kind of circumstantial types of premises. Is that also included, would you say, as a premise?
Maybe. I think doesn't circumstantial have a precise term of art definition in the law, and I don't know what that is.
Yeah, I'm sure it does. I don't know what it is either. But in general, I don't know if this is a legal case, is it? It's like you just said, it's a job.
Doesn't
it's
have
like
to be. It could be.
It's a
dispute
but it's like
or
a
whatever.
Job.
It's just, this is just a Wilard style conversation. Any social interaction, communication interaction where there is opposition.
Yeah. But I mean, it's a job interview or whatever. And this is like someone giving you a really bad reference, or something along those lines. I don't mean to make light of it. A painful event in someone's life, but like it's kind of in that way. It's not a legal matter, right? There's no real judge, even though the judge is the one who's on trial. Sorry.
Well, I guess in the thing I'm laying out here, everyone who participates is equally a judge. The person making a claim, the entirety of the audience, who's either accepting or disputing the claims, everyone has got their black robe on, and nobody's got gold stripes on.
Right, but there are different game rules than would be played in a legal setting.
Well, yeah, but again, I would see legal setting as a special case. That's a circumstance in which one particular set of discourse norms is in play to resolve a certain set of disputes. So that would be just included under the umbrella of general disputation, resolution, communication procedures.
Right, but then in a legal setting, something like circumstantial evidence or whatever may not be included in the same weight class as perhaps in something like a job interview, circumstantial evidence might, right? Where you've been given a bad reference and the people want to know, well, tell me more because we're really considering this guy to hire him or whatever. Why is, and I would say in this case, I would think that circumstantial might play a bigger role, because you're not passing judgment as to whether or not to put the person in jail or whatever. You're actually passing judgment as to whether or not to include them in your world, you know? And so I think that circumstantial evidence might have a greater amount of weight, because you're inviting them into, you know what I mean? You're within your walls. You're not putting them in another separate place. You know, you're not separating them from the outside world. You're actually kind of putting them in deeper into the world, you know, or something like that, where they get to have a bigger say in your world. Anyway, I mean, that's kind of, you know, trivial in a way. I actually have to say something. I have to piss like a racehorse. So
perfect place to end.
Yeah, exactly. Not a clunker at all.
I agree that is a reasonable reason.
Thanks.
To call the podcast complete.
Like my evidentiary premise is the piss stain on my pants. No. Okay, well then, you ready to call it?
Thanks for listening. 2.7.
Ooh, we bumped up to 2.7.
Come back next week. Well, we've got to be making progress, right?
Yeah, I hope so. Make some
Don't
progress,
you agree?
people. Yeah, I'm not unreasonable, and I am a person. Ta.
What do I think of when I need tools or building supplies? I think of ham and eggs.
I think of ham and cheese.
Ham and eggs.
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 Then I think of ham and lumber.
Ham and lumber.
Ham and lumber.
Ham and lumber?
Yeah, ham and lumber.
Ham and eggs, ham and cheese, and ham and lumber.